My name is Carly. I am 27. Last week, my mom surprised me with a birthday dinner at a retro diner. I walked in expecting awkward small talk and a couple of backhanded comments. I did not expect my own birthday cake to be the joke. After we ate, the server came out holding a sheet cake. Everyone turned toward me, phones up, already grinning. For 3 seconds, I let myself believe my mom had actually done something kind. Then I saw the writing on the cake. In big pink letters across the center, it said, "Oops, still a disappointment." There was a beat of silence, like the air forgot what to do. Then the whole table exploded in laughter. My mom clapped as if it was the funniest thing she'd ever seen. My little brother almost spit out his drink. Someone yelled, "Come on, it's just a joke." I stared at those words sitting in the frosting as if they had been waiting years to be said out loud. I did not cry. I did not scream. I pushed my chair back, picked up my bag, and stood up. My mom told me to sit down and take a joke. I did not even look at her. I turned toward the exit. My uncle stepped in front of me, hand on my arm telling me not to make a scene. I leaned in as if I were about to apologize and whispered one sentence in his ear. 2 days later, my entire family was in full-blown panic, and none of it was about the cake. If you're into messy family drama and quiet revenge that hits where it really hurts, you can stick around, hit like and subscribe so you do not miss how this all unfolds. The diner looked like a set from an old movie. Red vinyl booths, chrome edges, and a neon script buzzing over the counter. I walked in with that familiar weight in my chest, the kind that came whenever my family staged a nice gesture, and I was expected to play along. My mom, Sharon, had claimed a corner booth as if she were headlining a show. She sat with perfect posture, fingers around a sweating glass, eyes tracking me the way someone checks a receipt for mistakes. My dad, Gregory, sat beside her with his shoulders drawn in, wearing the resigned look of a man who planned to let the evening pass without stepping in. Across from them, my younger brother Dylan lounged with his phone in hand, recording short clips, his attention fixed on the screen more than on me. Sliding into the booth felt less like sitting down to dinner and more like stepping back into a role I thought I had outgrown. Sharon took in everything at once, my clothes, my hair, the way my hands picked at the paper-wrapped straw. Her comments floated across the table, sounding casual, but each one carried a small sting. Gregory stayed mostly neutral. Dylan kept lifting his phone whenever laughter rose, angling his lens toward me as if he were waiting for an expression worth posting. The food arrived on heavy plates and in baskets. Burgers sagged. Fries left grease on the table. Milkshakes sweated under fluorescent lights. Conversation drifted toward my job search and the future I apparently was not moving toward fast enough. Sharon mentioned people my age with solid careers and neat timelines, then let the silence between examples do the work. No one used the word failure, but it hung there anyway. I watched my reflection in the chrome napkin dispenser, tired circles under my eyes, a polite half smile that never reached them. I did not look like someone being celebrated. I looked like someone being evaluated. I felt that tiredness settle along my shoulders, but under it, something calmer, colder, stayed in place and kept watching. Servers moved through the aisles, topping off drinks and clearing plates. Sharon seemed to grow brighter as the table emptied, as if the performance were building toward a final act. She glanced toward the counter more than once, and each glance tightened something in my chest. When most of the plates were pushed aside and the noise in the diner had fallen into a low hum, I saw the server nod toward our booth and vanish behind a swinging door. Dylan straightened, phone ready. Gregory rubbed his palms on his jeans, expectant. I sat very still, feeling the air around us change in a way the lights did not explain. The server came back carrying a sheet cake on a plastic tray, candles flickering as she walked. Conversations at nearby tables dipped as people turned to look. The cake landed in front of me, frosting wobbling around the edges. For a moment, I let myself hope the message would be harmless, something bland and forgettable. Then I read what they had chosen to have written above my name. The reaction was instant and loud, a burst of laughter that wiped out whatever the jukebox was playing. Sharon pressed her hand to her chest in delight. Dylan lifted his phone higher to catch every second. Gregory watched me with the cautious interest of someone waiting to see if a glass will shatter. Sitting there under cheap neon with that message staring back at me from the icing, I understood I was not misreading them or overreacting. This was not a slip or a joke that went too far. It was how they wanted to define me, paid for and presented on a plastic tray. A few months before that birthday, I spent a Saturday back at my parents' house doing what they called a quick favor. My dad's back was acting up, and he needed help clearing out the small room he used as an office. In his mind, I had free time and working arms, which made me the obvious choice. I followed him down the hallway, past my old bedroom, and into a space that looked like it had been holding its breath for years. The office was more of a storage closet than a workspace. Cardboard boxes were stacked against the walls, and loose papers sagged on top of a filing cabinet. My dad pointed to a cluster of boxes he wanted moved to the garage, then lowered himself into a chair with the stiff movements of someone pretending he was fine. I started dragging boxes toward the door. Most of what I saw when I opened them was exactly what I expected. Old tax returns, brittle warranty booklets, and envelopes from banks with logos I barely recognized filled the folders. It felt like sifting through the paper version of background noise, all the boring proof that a family had kept existing year after year. I kept working until I reached a heavier box pressed into the corner. Inside, the folders were lined up in neat rows, each one labeled in my dad's careful handwriting. Near the back, one folder stood out. The cover was cream instead of manila, the corners rounded from being handled. My name was written across the front in blue ink, and under it, in smaller letters, was the word education. For a moment, I just held it and listened to my heartbeat pick up. Then curiosity won. The first pages were forms from an investment company. My grandfather, Donald, was listed as the person who opened the account. His slow, shaky signature was at the bottom of the document, exactly the way I remembered it from birthday cards. The description was simple: money set aside for my college expenses. The early account statements showed regular deposits going in on a schedule. Small amounts at first, then larger ones as the pages flipped forward. The balance climbed line by line, a quiet record of someone building a safety net under the version of me they hoped would exist someday. For a second, I could almost see that imaginary future, the one where I walked onto campus without a knot of panic about how to pay for it. Halfway through the stack, the rhythm broke. Deposits stopped. Withdrawal slips appeared in their place. Large amounts left the account in uneven chunks, sometimes only weeks apart. The names on the lines changed, too. My mom's was on some pages. My Uncle Keith's was on others, next to vague notes about family needs and temporary help that could mean anything or nothing. By the final statement, the balance was almost gone and the account was closed. The date landed just before the year I sat at our kitchen table filling out financial aid forms and being told there was nothing saved, that we were all doing the best we could, and I would have to piece the rest together myself. Sitting on the carpet with that folder open across my legs, I felt old conversations tilt out of alignment. There had been money once. It simply never reached me. My hands felt unsteady, but my thoughts were clear. I took out my phone and quietly photographed every page in the folder, one after another, until my camera roll held a full copy of a story no one had ever told me. Then I stacked the papers exactly as I had found them, slid the folder back into the box, and closed the lid before carrying it downstairs. On the drive home, my bag sat heavy on the passenger seat, my phone inside it holding proof that my family had not just mishandled my feelings. Long before a cake spelled it out, they had already spent my future. The days after my birthday settled into a deliberate quiet. I shut my phone off when I got home and let the apartment stay still. I went to my temporary job, came back to my small place, cooked simple food, and moved through each evening without the vibration of other people's reactions in my hand. It felt less like hiding and more like finally stepping outside a room where I had been on trial for years. In that silence, My thoughts slowed enough to line up. I remembered my mother brushing off my plans as unrealistic, my father staring at the table when someone took a joke too far, my brother repeating stories about how I was always behind. None of that was new. What changed was the sentence on the cake tying those moments together. Once I had seen it written out, it stopped being possible to pretend they meant anything kinder. On the second evening, I turned my phone back on. The screen filled with missed calls, voicemails, and message previews. My mother's name appeared again and again, followed by my father, my Uncle Keith, and Dylan. Long threads of texts and a few emails awaited me. Skimming through them was enough. My mother framed the dinner as support I had misunderstood and leaned on the idea that she had sacrificed too much to deserve this distance. My father urged me to talk before things went too far. Keith focused on my reaction as if leaving had been the real offense. Dylan tried to treat the whole thing as a joke we would eventually laugh about. I did not answer any of them directly. I wrote one short message in the family thread stating that I knew about the college fund my grandfather had opened for me, that I had copies of the account paperwork and statements, and that I would not be handling it through text. There was nothing dramatic in those lines, just the fact that the secret in their file was no longer invisible. When the message was sent, the quiet that followed felt heavier but steadier, like a floor that had stopped shifting, even if the room was still dark. Not long after, a name lit up my screen that almost never did. My Aunt Elaine lived several states away and usually stayed on the edge of family gatherings, close enough to be polite, but far enough to avoid being pulled into every argument. Her call carried a different weight from the others. She had spoken with her daughter, my cousin Riley, who had already heard the birthday story through relatives who never let anything stay quiet. In that version, I was the dramatic one, walking out over a harmless joke and throwing around accusations about money I did not understand. Somewhere in that game of retelling, my whispered comment to Keith had turned into a rumor. Sitting on my couch, I told Elaine about the folder in my father's office, the account labeled for my education, the steady deposits that stopped, the withdrawals signed by my mother and my uncle, and the dates that mirrored the years I signed loan papers. Saying it out loud turned scattered numbers into a line of cause and effect. Elaine listened without interrupting. When I finished, she admitted that small remarks from my grandfather years earlier had made her think something had been saved for me. But she had convinced herself she was mistaken because my parents never spoke as if it existed. Hearing the details forced her to look at that gap. She asked me to send what I had. I opened my laptop, pulled up the email where I had stored the images and documents, and attached every file to a message addressed to her. Watching the progress bar move across the screen, I realized how long I had been gripping that knowledge alone. When the email finally left my outbox, the evidence no longer lived only on my phone and in my memory. The weight of what my family had done shifted slightly away from being a secret I carried and towards something that could, at least in theory, be held up to the light. The email from Elaine with the lawyer's name felt different from everything my family had sent so far. It was short and practical, with no guilt woven into the lines. She wrote that what I had found matched things my grandfather once hinted at, and that this was bigger than a misunderstanding. She knew someone who handled situations where money meant for one person quietly ended up in another person's account. The lawyer's office was small and neat, tucked above a coffee shop downtown. He glanced at the stack of papers I brought and asked me to explain them before he read anything. I laid out the story in order, from the labeled folder in my dad's office to the closed account, then the student loans and years of payments that followed. Saying it like that made my own life sound like a case file. He read through each page with steady attention, checking names, dates, and account numbers without comment. To him, the college fund was not a favor. It was an account with a clear purpose and a named beneficiary. The withdrawals were not mistakes, but deliberate transfers that never touched tuition or housing. In plain language, he said there were formal ways to demand that money back along with the growth it should have earned. Hearing those words unsettled me, and settled me at the same time. I had always left room for the idea that there was some emergency or confusion I had not known about. Now an outsider was looking at the same numbers and calling them misuse without hesitation. It was both grounding and quietly devastating to realize my mother and Keith had seen my name on that account and still emptied it. When he asked whether I wanted to move forward, the answer was already sitting behind my ribs. I thought of the years of juggling rent and minimum payments, of my mother still talking about me as if I were lazy and ungrateful. Walking away would have meant choosing their comfort over my future again. I told him I wanted to take whatever steps were necessary. Those steps looked simple on paper. He requested official records from the investment company and the bank, so nothing rested solely on the copies I had found. He prepared a letter to my mother and Keith, stating that their use of the fund was under review and that documents tied them to every withdrawal. He copied Elaine so at least one other adult in the family saw the situation in formal language instead of sentiment. As soon as those letters landed, the tone of the family group chat shifted. The usual stream of jokes and photos was pushed aside by long messages about loyalty and keeping problems inside the family. My mother wrote about feeling attacked and insisted that everything she had done was for us. My father tried to calm everyone from the sidelines, but his messages sank without changing anything. Dylan added vague comments about drama that did not use my name, but clearly pointed at me. In the middle of that noise, my cousin Riley started asking questions. She wanted to know when the account had been opened, who had access to it, and why I had never been told it existed while I signed loan papers. She did not attach the documents she had seen, but every question hinted that there was more evidence than my parents were admitting. No one answered her directly. They dodged, shifted the subject, and circled back to my attitude instead of the money. Watching all of this unfold on my phone felt sharp and unreal. For years, whenever I challenged the way my family treated me, it turned into a lecture about how sensitive I was. Now, someone else in the same thread was tracing the same cracks without apologizing. While the chat kept spinning, the lawyer sent a brief update confirming that the official statements matched my copies and that we had enough to demand repayment. It did not erase my debt, but it shifted where the weight of the story sat. For once, I was not the only one holding it. The next turning point showed up at my door, not in my notifications. It was a slow, careful knock on a weeknight when the building was already quiet and my brain was somewhere between exhausted and numb. I stood there for a moment, hand hovering over the handle, knowing that whoever was on the other side was not here to make this easier. Avoiding them had never changed what they did. It had only delayed when I had to face it. My mother was in the hallway, coat half-buttoned, hair pulled back too tight, as if she had rushed out before she could talk herself into staying home. The overhead light in the corridor made her look sharper, less soft-focused than she liked to appear. For years, seeing her at my doorstep would have felt like a rescue. That night, it felt like the past trying to push its way back in. I opened the door, but I did not step aside. She walked into my apartment as if it were a room she had the right to inspect. Her eyes skimmed over the second-hand couch, the wobbly table, the stack of bills on the counter. Nothing about the space matched the picture she had always held up as a successful adult life. I could feel her turning every object into evidence that I still needed the kind of guidance she believed only she could give. For once, I let that judgment land and did nothing to soften it. She started talking in a tone she reserved for doctors and school principals, the polished voice she used when she wanted to sound reasonable. She said she was worried about me, that she did not understand how a birthday dinner had turned into distance and legal papers. She framed everything as a misunderstanding made bigger by my hurt feelings. The cake and the words on it vanished from her version, replaced by vague references to jokes that had gotten out of hand. In the story she told, I had taken things too seriously and dragged strangers into family business. When she finally mentioned the money, it was almost an afterthought. The fund became something that had been sitting there during hard years, another resource to pull from when she and my Uncle Keith were trying to keep everyone afloat. The withdrawals turned into difficult choices, the kind any parent would make. My name on the documents, my plans for school, the loans I had signed to cover what was supposedly not there, all of that slid to the edges of her explanation. She wanted me to see sacrifice where I saw a promise quietly emptied. Sitting across from her, I could feel two realities pressing against each other. One was printed in black ink on statements from an investment company, showing contributions intended specifically for my education and a balance that had drained away long before I filled out my first financial aid form. The other lived entirely in her mouth, a narrative where necessity excused everything and gratitude was the only acceptable response. In the past, I would have tried to find a middle ground between those two things. Now I understood there was not one. There was no apology hidden in her words. What I heard instead was fear, carefully wrapped in concern. Fear of being judged by people who did not share our last name. Fear of losing the comfort and stability that money had quietly secured. Fear that the version of herself she showed the world might finally crack. She never said she was afraid of court, but every sentence curved in that direction. She wanted me to stop before a judge ever saw what I had uncovered. She wanted this to stay where family secrets usually survive, in the shadows, unexamined. When I told her I was not pulling back and that I intended to see the process through, the room went unnaturally still. I did not raise my voice. I did not recite the years she had cut me down so she could feel taller. I simply refused to step back into the role that made her choices easier to live with. The pain in her expression did not come from what she had done. It came from realizing that guilt no longer worked on me. She left stiffly, as if the hallway itself might pass judgment on her. After the door closed, the apartment felt emptier, and yet, for the first time, unmistakably mine. For a while, I drifted through the rooms in small circles, waiting for the next wave. It came as a call from my father. His voice carried that familiar weariness, the sound of a man who had spent a lifetime staying neutral by looking away. He did not dispute the fund or the withdrawals. Instead, he worried about lawyers, about court, about what this would do to my mother and to Keith. Beneath all of it was a single hope, that I might decide this was not worth the trouble. As I listened, it became clear that no one was confused about the facts anymore. They were only afraid that those facts might finally have consequences. Handling it quietly on their terms would have meant agreeing that my future could be used up, and then forgotten. I told him I would be following the advice of the one person in this situation whose job was to protect me. That was all I had left to give. A few days later, an envelope from the court appeared in my mailbox. Thin, plain, unremarkable. Inside was a single page with a case number, a date, a time, and a room in a building I had never set foot in. It did not mention love, sacrifice, or hurt feelings. It did not care who thought they deserved forgiveness. It simply stated when the people who had treated my future like spare cash would have to answer for it. Holding that paper, I felt fear settle in beside a quiet, stubborn sense of certainty. For once, what they had done would not be measured by my tolerance. It would be measured by something they could not rewrite. The day of the hearing arrived under gray skies and tired light that made the courthouse steps feel heavier than they were. I paused outside, the case number fresh in my mind, reminding myself that I was not walking in as a child asking for permission. I was walking in with proof. The thought did not erase the tremor under my skin, but it kept me moving. Inside, everything was stripped down to essentials. Wooden benches, the judge's bench, 2 tables facing what had already happened. My lawyer sat beside me, calm and precise, organizing clipped documents. Across the room, my mother and Keith took their seats with their counsel. My father sat at the end of their row, shoulders drawn in as if trying to disappear. Elaine settled in behind me, quiet support in a space that had no room for emotional roles. The judge did not care about the cake, the diner, or the messages that followed. The only language that mattered was printed on account forms and bank statements. One by one, my lawyer told the story in that language. He presented the paperwork my grandfather had signed to create the fund, the designation naming me as its beneficiary, the years of steady deposits, and then the sudden shift when deposits stopped and withdrawals began. Every page showed the same pattern. The signatures belonged to my mother and my uncle. The money moved into their accounts under vague labels that never touched tuition or housing in my name. The official records matched the copies I had taken from my father's office. There was no missing clause, no hidden permission to turn that account into a family pool. On paper, it was simple. Money meant for one purpose had been taken for another. Their side leaned hard on context. Difficult years, unexpected expenses, pressure to keep everyone afloat. They framed the account as a tool they had needed, not something they had chosen to empty. They suggested that love should outweigh the technical language on institutional letterhead. None of it changed the numbers. The judge listened, then returned to the documents. What mattered was not how my mother described her sacrifices or how Keith explained his struggles. It was the clear record showing that money set aside for my education had been spent without my knowledge and never replaced. The decision came calmly, almost clinically. The balance at closure was calculated. The growth that should have accrued was added. A total was set. They were ordered to repay it on a schedule, with enforcement measures if they failed. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it settled with a heavy, quiet finality. This was not a reward. It was a delayed attempt to restore what should have existed all along. The court did not address the years of loan payments, the interest I had already paid, or the emotional cost of realizing that my safety net had been cut without warning. Those pieces were mine to carry elsewhere. In the weeks that followed, consequences rippled through the family. My mother's house became a subject of appraisals and refinancing. Keith's confidence gave way to talk of damaged credit and forced sales. Relatives who once laughed along began to keep their distance, not because they suddenly understood me, but because the fallout had landed too close. My mother reached out one last time, through a thick envelope instead of a hallway confrontation. The handwriting was familiar. Inside, she blended history, necessity, and motherhood into a single justification. Any apology was so tightly stitched into self-defense that it vanished. I read a few lines, felt the old urge to make her comfortable, then folded the pages and threw them away, not in anger, but in acceptance. I did not call. I did not visit. I did not help her prepare for what repayment might cost. Cutting contact was not punishment. It was a boundary that should have existed long before a judge ever said her name. My connection to Keith ended just as quietly. No dramatic scenes, no final speeches, just a deliberate choice not to return to spaces where being related excused harm. Life did not suddenly become easy. My loans remained. I still worked, searched for better pay, and tried to imagine a future not tied to their approval. I started therapy. Not because a court required it, but because I no longer wanted to live as if one wrong step would confirm the label they had given me. Slowly, the belief that my value depended on absorbing everyone else's choices began to loosen. If this story offers anything, it is not the fantasy that the legal system fixes everything. Documents and judges can deal with money. They cannot turn someone into the parent you needed. What they can do is draw a line and say your future is not a community fund for other people's emergencies. The real shift came when I stopped waiting for my family to recognize my worth and started acting as if it existed, whether they saw it or not. Love without respect is not enough. Jokes that reveal what someone truly thinks are not harmless. And sometimes, the only way to stop being used up is to step away. I once believed protecting my family meant staying quiet and forgiving quickly. Now I know the only person I was protecting by staying silent was the one who wrote "still a disappointment" on a cake and expected me to smile while swallowing it.